Sports Radio.
Here comes the siren. I want to go higher. Oh, my goodness. He's doing a drive. Deep left field. No doubt about it. Posey will defend. Oh! LeBron James with no regard for human life.
Pass is intercepted at the goal line by Malcolm Butler. Unreal.
Oh, baby, for sure.
Cabin Sports Radio starts now.
Man, to heck with Malcolm Butler. Come on down to Winnipeg.
Yeah.
29 years in the making. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers are your 2019 Grey Cup champions. Mike, I might have cried a little last night.
I bet you did. I know you did.
I've joined you in the winner's circle.
It's been a good year.
It has been a good year. And it's going to be a good show. And we're going to start it off right, music-wise, with Journey. You know it has to happen.
Oh, yeah.
Back with more on Cabin Sports Radio.
The CSR Podcast.
Cabin Sports Radio brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward. Big congratulations to them this past weekend, putting on the NWT Sport Hall of Fame 2019 induction ceremony, And big congrats to the three athletes that were inducted, of course, and their families of John Tram, Floyd Daniels, and Roseanne Allen. Was a fantastic night. And you can check out more on that forthcoming in the next few weeks or so at sportnorth.com. I'm sure they will have more about the NWT Sport Hall of Fame induction ceremony as well. Sport North, speaking of them right now, they are looking for volunteer mission staff positions for the 2020 Arctic Winter Games in Whitehorse. Deadline to apply is December 20th, and you can find more information on that as well as your application registration forms at sportnorth.com. Welcome to Cabin Sports Radio. I am Lekter. To my immediate front is Unbreakable Mike Gibbons. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. I bet you are doing better.
I think so.
Yeah.
I would say that normally anyway.
Yeah.
After a Bomber win. But of course, you're just getting over a cold or something.
Yeah.
What's going on with you, man?
I think, you know what? I ticked every box, I think, for influenza.
Uh-oh.
So we'll have to make sure we sterilize this station when we're done here.
Okay.
Maybe get a new mic sock.
You've got your own personal mic sock.
Yeah, I brought that.
Right now.
Yeah. Who uses this one in the morning? Sorry. But yeah, slowly getting over the hump here.
Yeah.
I'm feeling a little bit better.
Well, 'tis the season.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Someone's got to be sick. And by someone, I mean literally everybody.
Yeah. And I was going through my whole office.
Yeah.
I'm telling myself it's not my fault. Probably is. But I did what I was supposed to do. And
You stayed home.
I took 2 days off.
Attaboy.
I nurtured myself a lot of liquid foods, for 4 days. So I'm ready to eat something real again. But like I said, I'm on the mend. I'm feeling better.
Good. You're looking good. You're sounding good. It's all good. Bombers won the Grey Cup. It's all good, Mike.
It's all good.
107 years of Grey Cup history to this point. 29-year drought.
Yeah.
For the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They finally did it 33-12 last night over the Hamilton Tiger Cats in Calgary, the 107th Grey Cup. Their first franchise Grey Cup since 1990, Mike. I was 4 years old when this happened. Now, when that happened, rather, I don't remember that Grey Cup. They have won two in my lifetime to this point. The previous one before 1990 was 1988. I was 2 years old. Maybe, 2 years old. Did not remember a thing about that one. It's been a long, long time coming.
Yeah.
And I feel like now I finally have a sense of what you were feeling this past, what would it have been? June?
June
Toronto
13th,
Raptors.
2019.
Oh, a date you will never forget.
We were at the bar, of course, for Game 5, and that's where I thought it was going to happen.
Yes.
It didn't. That was when Kawhi went crazy, I think, 10 straight points.
Right.
The place was going pretty bananas. We were with the wheel as well. Couldn't get it done. So I had to watch Game 6 in the comfort of my own home alone. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Is that what you ended up doing?
That's what I ended up doing.
I was going to text you, but I don't know. I get so anxious that I don't even want to entertain the idea of other people talking to me or being in my bubble.
Yeah.
So I think I was trying to be respectful of that and not invade. But on the outside, and because I wasn't as emotionally invested, obviously, last night as you were,
right?
I felt good for you. 21-6 is when I first checked in. I did my check-in at halftime, and then a follow-up at the end of the third. It just so happened, it just timed out that way for me, and I felt pretty good for you. But I knew that, I think regardless of what the score was, you weren't feeling good.
You knew that I was absolutely on edge until about a minute and a half left in the game when there was not a chance that anything was going to happen. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers had it signed, sealed, and delivered. And even right up until that final kneel, there's just something about watching your team fail for 29 years that just, there's not a moment of comfort in a game like that when you're just so used to them finding a way to lose.
Yeah.
Even when it looks beyond obvious that they're going to get it done. 29 years of frustration. That is really hard to shake.
Yeah.
Finally did last night, and I gotta say, it felt amazing.
Yeah.
And it would be amazing if it was just that my team won a championship after a 29-year drought. The first time I remember seeing a team that I cheer for actually win something. Of course, I'm unfortunately a Toronto Maple Leafs fan as well, Winnipeg Jets fan. They have not done a whole lot. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers have been there the whole time, but have not been a factor the whole time. This was really special for me.
Yeah.
And I feel like I could watch games with other people now.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I just feel like now that this is out of the way, they've done it, they've got a championship that I am going to remember watching for the rest of my life. I don't have to be nervous anymore.
Right. And I think the one thing I want to leave with you is to really cherish it. Because, like you said, last championship coming in 90, that was the same year I was born.
Yep.
My squad won. This year, the Raptors, of course, inaugural season 95. So that's, 25 years. So you can go, that's a quarter of a lifetime, less for a lot of people. So some people won't see their teams. The Toronto Maple Leafs, you mentioned, we're both fans of 67. What are we going on? 52 years now?
52 years, yes.
So in both of our lifetime, you can add our lifetimes together, and there hasn't been a title. So that's my message, is to cherish every minute of it, because you don't know when it's going to happen again. It might be another 29 years.
Oh, Mike, don't say that.
I'm sorry. I hope it's not. I really hope it's not. Especially with Andrew Harris in the fold. I mean, Caleros is a free agent, isn't he? So
he is, yeah.
That's in the air. But, hey, you hope they can bring the band back. There's always issues, with money and personnel and whatever. But I hope it's not another 29 years.
I mean, that is one of the things about the CFL, is that it is from year to year, rosters are a bit less stable than they are in the NFL. You don't have those long-term contracts because, of course, for the most part, unless they're, long-time veteran players in the CFL, a lot of these guys are signing 1 and 2 year contracts as, they're trying to play well for the team that they're signed with, but they're also auditioning for another shot south of the border.
Yes.
For the big money. And that's just the nature of the CFL. Every CFL fan understands that. We all know what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
You want to get paid to play this sport that you've dedicated your life to, obviously. Having said that, when there are players that just, they buy in, they love the league, and there have been many CFL players in the past that have got that opportunity south of the border. They've made good on their shot in the CFL. They've got an opportunity in the NFL. They've made good on that. Almost every one of them, when they've been asked after their NFL careers have wrapped up, they've been asked about the CFL. They have such fond memories of playing in Canada, and almost every one of them would tell you that if the CFL could pay the kind of money that the NFL did, they never would have left.
Yeah.
They would have stayed in it. It's a different game. It's in my opinion a more exciting game. But, that's up for debate, obviously, between the CFL and NFL. But that's just the nature of professional football in North America. You are essentially auditioning for a shot at the big money south of the border. But Having said that, that's not to say that this league is an afterthought by any stretch of the imagination. This championship win, this Grey Cup victory, means so much to the city of Winnipeg. And you don't have to look any further than you just Google Winnipeg Blue Bombers 2019 Grey Cup champs right now. You'll probably see a video of them arriving at the Winnipeg airport about 3 or so hours ago.
Yep.
Huge crowd.
Nice.
There to greet them. Stage all set up, and the Grey Cup arriving in 2 pieces.
Oh.
There was a bit of a party last night.
Oh, no.
It's an old trophy.
Yeah,
it is. 107 years old. It's been around for a while.
It was up here a couple years ago.
It was up here
We got to play with it.
Yeah.
We got to walk around with it.
It's got some miles on it.
Yeah.
This is actually, to my knowledge, the 7th time that the Grey Cup has been broken. I think the last time was after the 2014 Calgary Stampeders Grey Cup victory. But yes, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers ending a 29-year drought in fantastic style.
Yes.
A party, I'm sure, that was one for the ages last night in Calgary. Yes, so the Grey Cup is in need of repairs. I'm sure that will be undertaken very soon. But I just want to take a moment to reflect on this game in particular and this season for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. That was really cool that it was mentioned a few times during the game last night. I think, first of all, it was so appropriate that the final score was 33-12, 33 being the total score for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and the number of their hometown hero, their leader, and the first player to ever win Most Outstanding Canadian and Most Outstanding Player.
That's right.
At a Grey Cup game, Andrew Harris. He signed with the Bombers, I think, 3 years ago, and the whole idea, he had spent his career up to BC at that point. Actually, in his rookie season, as the starting tailback for the BC Lions, he won a Grey Cup over the Winnipeg Blue Bombers way back in 2011. Fast forward to 2019, and they made a comment at one point during the game last night. I think after the game, they were interviewing Andrew Harris and said, you made a comment years ago after your 2011 victory that it almost seemed like this came too easy. And then it was almost like fate was like, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, make it work for the next one.
Yeah.
Not only did he have to work for the next one, but he did it in such dramatic fashion, coming back to his hometown team that had, at that time, already one of the longest Grey Cup droughts in league history. The longest actually is 30 years, so the Bombers were only 1 year away from tying that league record of 30 years, which was the Toronto Argonauts, I believe, from 1953 to 83. So the Bombers were not far away from being the notoriously most failing franchise.
Yeah, you don't want that distinction.
No, exactly. You don't. But they had it for the modern era, the more modern era. They were the failingest team up until this point. But so cool that Andrew Harris, that was his whole motivation. Coming back to Winnipeg, coming back to play in front of his hometown crowd.
Yep.
He wanted to be that hero to bring a Grey Cup back to Winnipeg. I think he was maybe a year old the last time the Bombers won a Grey Cup. He was joined by Nick Dembski a couple seasons ago, Canadian receiver, also a born and raised Winnipegger. And really cool that they were also joined by another player named Brady Oliveira, who was injured early in the season. But Andrew Harris, Nick Dembski, and Brady Oliveira all hail from the same high school in Winnipeg, Oak Park High School. So big shout out to Oak Park High School for representing huge in the hometown Winnipeg Blue Bombers victory last night. But beyond that, the entire team, an absolute team victory. The Bombers defense was just on fire all night. Dane Evans, who I think has an incredibly bright future in this league, young starting quarterback for the Hamilton Tiger Cats, he was under siege. 5 sacks last night, I think 2 interceptions. Willie Jefferson, the Bombers defensive end, who won Most Outstanding Defensive Player earlier in the week, showed absolutely why he deserved that trophy. 3 sacks on the night, a forced fumble. His counterpart on the other side, Jackson Jeffcoat, 2 quarterback sacks, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. And Drake Nevis factoring in with another quarterback sack. I don't think Dane Evans had seen that type of pressure up until this game. And the whole Bomber defense just looked absolutely ferocious. Like, it was something to watch. And then beyond that, this past offseason, Adam Bighill, their leader on defense, one of the best middle linebackers, I think, possibly in CFL history. There was a rumor that he was possibly going to go back to BC. He decided he wanted to stay in Winnipeg because he believed in the team. He believed in Mike O'Shea as the head coach, and it paid off big time. Obviously, along with Andrew Harris, his first Grey Cup victory since 2011 with the BC Lions. And finally, I want to give a massive shout out also to, two massive shout outs. Mike O'Shea, head coach. Yep. The guy, ever since he came and took over the job as head coach, just showed absolute leadership across the board, all the time, a complete professional. There were times when he had to face the music when people thought he's not getting the job done, and he just always seemed to have the right thing to say, and it's one of those kind of intangibles for a head coach. I think just knowing what to say when the heat is on. Right. You didn't necessarily agree with him, but you always had to respect what he had to say. The second massive shout out going to the new, I think, just favorite person in Winnipeg, Chris Streveler the Leveler. Yeah. He was limping up and down the field all night and still just gutted it out and showed this team and this city like what he is made of and how badly he wanted to win. Yeah. You could not look at what he was doing on the field and not elevate your game to match that level. And one more shout out.
Let's hear it.
To Zach Collaros.
Yeah.
My God, like you couldn't write a better story. That guy, the third play of the game, knocked out cold, concussion, probably written off for the rest of his career. Gets a last-second opportunity with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers to step in and try and help this team, and he leads them all the way to the Grey Cup. And now you got to wonder, what are they going to do with him? He's a free agent in the offseason. He was a rental to begin with. Is he still a rental? I don't know. I honestly don't know. There's lots of stuff to talk about and figure out for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers from this point on. Yeah. But we don't have time to cover that. Right now, we will revel in the fact that the 29-year drought is over. The Grey Cup is headed back to Winnipeg. And on that note, we're going to talk to my dad later on in the show. Biggest Winnipeg Blue Bomber fan I know. And Mike, you know what? We need a Blue Bombers fan.
We do.
Not just a Blue Bomber fan. We need a Winnipeggers on the ground perspective. So that's going to come up a little bit later on in the show.
That's what Cabin Sports Radio does.
That's right.
We got people and places.
But before we get to that, we're going to talk about, as we're discovering now, the worst person in the world.
The Cabin Sports Radio Podcast, brought to you by Sport North, moving sport forward.
Cabin Sports Radio, brought to you by Sport North. So last week on the program, we talked about, was the Bab clock ticking? Yeah. You introduced us to that tasty little pun. That was delicious.
Thank you.
And little did we know just how close the Bab clock was to running out, because shortly after that episode, I think they lost that night, and then possibly the night after that, or was it the first night of the road trip? I think it was after the Vegas loss.
It was after the Vegas loss, which was after the really ugly 6-1 loss to the Penguins.
Yes.
Was there a game in between? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so.
Saturday to Tuesday.
I believe after the Vegas loss.
That was it.
That was it. The hammer fell. Yeah. The Bab clock ticked down to 0.
Yeah.
And Mike Babcock was no longer the head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs, ending an era that was supposed to be part of the big turnaround.
Yeah.
Mike Babcock came in 4 years ago with massive fanfare. It was pretty much across the board, he was considered the best head coach in the NHL.
Yep.
Probably you could go beyond that and say the world. He had coached the Detroit Red Wings to a Stanley Cup victory. He was head coach of the 2003 Anaheim Mighty Ducks that lost in the Stanley Cup final that they probably really didn't have any business being in. He coached, of course, Team Canada to 2014 gold medal. Was he the head coach of 2010?
going to ask myself.
Yeah.
I can't recall.
I can't remember if he was at the Vancouver
At least one gold
Olympics.
medal. But probably more.
At the very least, I mean, 2014, the soundest Olympic gold medal victory for Team Canada, as far as any of us can remember. And he was the head coach there. And when he came in to be the savior of the Toronto Maple Leafs, that was the resounding thought. They have the best coach in the world right now. Mm-hmm. There is no looking back. The Toronto Maple Leafs are headed towards success. That, I mean, obviously did happen, not without a lot of accompaniment from a lot of top-tier talent. Mike Babcock was blessed by by having the likes of Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews and Morgan Riley, John Tavares. All of these guys came together under him as the head coach, and they set a franchise record not long ago with 49 wins, 49 regular season wins, but could not get over that hump. Lost to Washington in the first round of the playoffs, lost to Boston 2 years ago in the first round of the playoffs, and then once again last year lost to Boston in a Game 7 first round. And there was a little bit of a rumbling, as I recall at that time, at the end of last year's playoffs, that this might be the last opportunity. Yeah. If they can't get past the first round, that might be the end of Mike Babcock. But to me, it seemed premature, and I think it was just because there seemed to be a lot more factors than just coaching that were holding this team back. The talent was not in question, but there seemed to be something else, and maybe it was just not that the right players were not in place.
Right.
That was supposed to be alleviated this past offseason. Of course, the Nazem Kadri trade brought Tyson Barrie. He was expected to shore up the defense. Nikita Zaitsev was sent packing. Cody Ceci came back the other way. And this team was expected to be better, and they haven't been better.
No.
So, Mike Babcock, gone. Sheldon Keefe, who has had tons of success with the Sioux Greyhounds in the OHL, and then the Toronto Marlies, of course. He becomes the new head coach, and the team has found instant success since then. And since that time, not only has Mike Babcock found himself out of a job, he has pretty much been painted as the most evil person in the world.
And I'm not crazy about that. As soon as someone loses their job, all of these negative stories come out, but they're obviously not going to surface if he still is at the helm of the Toronto Maple Leafs and holding that head coach position. So generally, this type of stuff does happen. And we've heard some pundits say that now that gate sort of opened up, I think we're going to hear some more Mike Babcock stories. Mike Commodore, chief among them, anti-Mike Babcock.
Wasted no time.
Leading the charge. He had some fiery words to say via Twitter. Mark Frazier as well, two former NHLers. Really not very fond of Mike Babcock or his coaching tactics. We know that he's not a, there's players coaches, right, in the NHL, and maybe he doesn't quite fit that player coach model per se. And his tactics, at least from these two former players, really coming under the microscope now. And then there was, of course, that sort of bombshell story involving Mitch Marner.
Yes. I don't know if this. So I think that this just broke this morning.
Yeah.
The story.
I saw that it was on the Toronto Sun too. There was also the Athletic. Now been picked up everywhere. I think Elliot Friedman actually did reach out to Mike Babcock and heard back from him. And he did offer some explanation, but basically the gist of it is, in his rookie year, when someone's pretty vulnerable, Babcock approached Mitch Marner, thinking it was in confidence. It's a weird thing to do.
It's such a strange thing, yeah.
But what he asked him to do was to go up and down the roster and list players based on their work ethic to the lowest work ethic on the team. So basically the most energetic, the most motivated player, all the way down to the laziest person on the team.
Right.
And then Mike Babcock decided to share that list publicly with the rest of the team and let them know that it's coming from one of their rookies in Mitch Marner. I think, was it Kadri that was at the bottom of the list.
Oh, you know what?
I think that's what I heard.
I didn't actually see or hear where players ranked on the list, but that's
kind of surprising. And with someone who plays as hard as Nazem Kadri does, that he would be on towards the bottom of that list. But this is now being picked up by more and more pundits. I think Jeremy Roenick was just quoted as saying that his tactics are Bush League. So people are coming out of everywhere now that these stories are sort of coming to light. But if this is true, I don't know what's and he was quoted as saying to Elliot Friedman that it wasn't a good idea, and he did apologize at the time. Whether or not that's true, we may never know. But it's a divisive tactic. Like right away, you're pitting your guys against each other.
Yeah,
especially a rookie who's probably feeling pretty vulnerable coming in. Is that what you want to do? Now, thankfully, I think Marner's come out and said that no one's held it against him.
Right.
There was no animosity between him and his fellow teammates as a result of his list. But it would have been pretty hard. What if you were to find out that you're at the bottom of that list? That's not going to make you feel good.
Yeah.
I want to push the rook around a little bit. But if that's true, that sort of fits with what Mike Commodore was saying, is that your players gave up on you.
Right.
And this is the type of coach that seeks to create divided locker rooms.
Which, why would you ever do that?
Right. Players turn on themselves and each other, and then ultimately turn on the coach. So if this is true, it does sort of fall in line with what these former NHLers, who probably had similar or not great experiences with Mike Babcock.
Yeah.
But that is what both Mike Commodore and Mark Fraser are sort of painting pictures of as pretty dysfunctional locker rooms with Babcock at the helm.
It's just confusing.
Yeah.
Honestly, more than anything else. Like you could see if this was maybe a rookie head coach, like Sheldon Keefe right now, a rookie head coach in the NHL who's maybe trying to make an impact or make a statement with his players, and just I don't know, figure out where the locker room's at, that you might do something like that. But even that, to put that on a rookie player, especially a star, high draft pick rookie player in Toronto, you've already got enough pressure on you.
Yeah.
Why are you putting internal pressure?
Yeah.
On one of your, one of these players who you're hoping is going to be one of your young stars. Mm-hmm. I just don't get it. And this was not a situation where Mike Babcock was a rookie head coach. He had been a head coach of the Detroit Red Wings. He'd been head coach of the Anaheim Mighty Ducks before that. Like we said, he coached Team Canada to a gold medal at the Olympics. This is not a guy who was still figuring things out.
Not at all.
And it kind of it makes me wonder if we just had the wool pulled over our eyes as Toronto Maple Leaf fans I mean, in general, yeah, sure. But with regards to Mike Babcock specifically, because I feel like he was sold to us in the opposite way of what we're hearing now. It seemed like he was a player's coach.
Yeah.
It seemed like he was kind of a forward thinker, and that, he was very much all about the power of positivity and obviously working hard and that, but like he seemed like he was a bit more of a progressive thinker as far as hockey coaches go. And now we're hearing he's an old school guy that still has an old school hard-headed approach in a game where it just doesn't work anymore. The game has changed. And then you hear this story about Mitch Marner and just like divisive, manipulative tactics. And I've heard, a few other players, there's been whisperings of like, hey, he's really not liked in the locker room because he tries to manipulate players. Mm-hmm. And when you hear a story like this, like I say, it's just baffling. Like, why would you have ever done that?
Yeah.
So I really don't know what to make of this story. And when I first heard about this whole list thing, my thought was that I don't know how much stock I put into it, because this is Toronto.
Yeah.
The Toronto sports media is always buzzing around looking for the next thing to talk about. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that if this had happened, it's such a bizarre thing that someone would have picked it up before now.
It reminds me that when there's smoke, there is fire.
Yeah.
And you alluded to it earlier. He kind of had a pass at the end of last season. The D-line wasn't as firmed up as it could have been. Right. There was obviously disciplinary issues. Kadri not in the lineup for games 3 through 7,
right?
Because of an incident with him again. So there were excuses, you could say, but the pundits got louder, and then the Mike Commodores and the Mark Frasers, even before the firing, were getting louder and louder, and the pretty pedestrian start, I think 9-10-4 by the time he was ultimately axed. It just got louder, but you always heard of the rumblings with Dubas, and apparently, in his thank you letter, omitted him completely.
Yep.
So there's clearly something there, and you touched on him being an old school guy. Dubas is clearly not an old school guy.
No.
So I don't think was ever really satisfied with the roster that he was given, but wasn't able to make that work. So now, like you said, maybe we did have the wool pulled over our eyes a little bit, and maybe we'll be a little more attuned to it going forward, that when there is smoke, maybe there is fire. I think I saw another story that upwards of 90% of Leafs players wanted him gone. They wanted a new voice. So they get it now in Sheldon Keefe. Off to a pretty promising start so far. Very small sample size, obviously. But perhaps the locker room was a lot more divided than we thought. And of course, none of that will come to light when someone is still employed. And you won't hear the current players speak to it too much. They're professionals. They've got to play for the organization still.
Yep.
They have the same general manager, the same ownership group, and they're trying to make things right with a brand new head coach with 0 NHL experience. So they're going to try to do things right, but we may never know just how fractured it was in there. But this doesn't really paint a great picture.
And it's interesting now because I've seen a couple mentions that it might not be long before Mike Babcock winds up with another team.
Yeah, Seattle is something I've heard thrown about there. And
now you just kind of got to wonder about that. Like, how is anyone seeing? Because everyone is seeing all this.
Yep.
There's no one who's looking at Mike Babcock and not seeing the noise of all this fallout from his from parting ways with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Everyone knows what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's just hard to believe. I mean, obviously there's something to be said about learning from your mistakes, but it's just so negative right now. And if I was Mike Babcock, and I think I said this last week, if I was Mike Babcock, the last thing I would be doing is entertaining offers when you've got 3 years paid vacation waiting for you on the Maple Leafs dime.
Yeah.
Take a year, figure things out,
Yeah.
let it all blow over, and then find out where you're at from there. But it'll be really interesting to see, what the future holds for Mike Babcock and what other stories come out of the locker room.
You know whose opinion I would actually really like to hear on this matter?
Who?
Grapes. But he's
got a podcast now. We did an episode on it. Of
course. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
We're not going to play that for you. But
well, he's an old school guy too, right?
That's right.
I'd love for Ron to give him a pointed question about that tactic and what his thoughts are, but alas, we'll never get it.
All right. Well, we might have to check in with Grapes. Who knows? Anyway, we are going to have to leave that there because I got to call my dad.
Yeah.
We got to talk some Bombers. That's next on Cabin Sports Radio.
The CSR Podcast.
Welcome back to Cabin Sports Radio. So I've asked Unbreakable Mike Gibbons to leave the studio for a minute because, as you know, of course, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers won the 107th Grey Cup, ending a 29-year drought. And it's time to get a Winnipegger's perspective. Who better to chat with than my dad, Gary Lekterman. Mr. Lekter, how you doing, Dad?
Not bad, Scotty. Yourself?
Not bad at all. How are you feeling today, sir?
I basically had a stupid grin on my face all day at work today. No matter what happened, I just couldn't stop grinning. For one thing, didn't seem to matter. Just watching the game, it was incredible. I think my toes and my butt cheeks finally unclenched with about 3 minutes left in the game as I was finally confident of the Bomber victory.
Oh, yeah, there was a moment. I think I was probably right there with you. Yeah, it wasn't until it was exceedingly obvious that there was not a mathematical hope in hell that Hamilton was going to come back and do anything in that game, did I personally breathe a final sigh of relief and then shed a tear or two. How were you in the waterworks department last night?
More than one tear, I'll tell you that, Scotty. That was 29 years of frustration just started to flow out, and it was a good flow, I'll tell you that. It felt good.
And Mom, did she join you? I know she's tougher than you, but
she surprisingly did. I mean, I didn't think she'd be that emotional, but she even gave me a hug. I mean, that's got to count for something.
Oh, good for her. Oh,
yeah.
If there was anywhere that I would have rather been other than huddled in my living room with as few people around as possible, it would have been watching that game with you guys because, I mean, you've always been my favorite people to watch our Winnipeg Blue Bombers with. And like you said, it's been 29 years of frustration or almost my entire lifetime. So it's been a little bit of, yes, pent-up energy and a little bit of emotion last night in the city in general. Speaking of the city of Winnipeg, what is the mood like there today? It must be crazy.
Everybody's walking around with a smile. I mean, there's a few people, of course, that had no clue as to what was going on, but that's expected because not everybody follows football, even though they should. But, yeah, for the most part, everybody was in a good mood. Nothing seemed to get anybody down.
Yeah. I mean, what is there to be upset about today?
Exactly. It was just so satisfying to watch that game as it played out.
So the Bombers arrived home back in Winnipeg at about 3 p.m., I think your time.
Right.
Did you go to the airport? Did you greet them?
I did not, unfortunately. I work at a place where there would have been probably confusion had I gone to the airport and leave my job early. So unfortunately, I was there in spirit, but not in person.
Fair enough. Okay, well, I don't know if you've heard by now, but the Grey Cup itself arrived in 2 pieces. So there was...
Not the first time, right?
Not the first time. No, in fact, I think the 7th by my count, if I'm not mistaken. But so obviously a bit of excitement with that team and probably quite a party. But as you mentioned, as we all know, 29 years since the last Winnipeg Blue Bombers victory. You've been a fan for a lot longer than that. What are some of your first memories as a Blue Bombers fan?
Oh, boy, first memories. Actually, my wife, or your mom, Lynn, was a Bombers fan before I was. She had season tickets back in the 70s, and I remember going to a few games with my dad back in the 70s, but not really getting into the Bombers until about the 80s, and not just because they won the Grey Cup. One of the first memories I remember really getting into them is we were watching the West final game. There was 3 of us, 2 of my friends, Duff and Weldon, you know them well. We were watching the game with a few drinks, and they were playing in BC, and as usual, the Bombers had not been to the Grey Cup in 22 years at that point. And the Bombers somehow knocked off BC, and all 3 of us just sat back with just a stupid grin on our face thinking, we've got this made. I mean, the team we're playing finished with a 6-10-1 record, whereas we finished something like 10-6, 10-5, or something like that. It was a huge discrepancy. And, of course, the way the game played out, the Bombers blew Hamilton's doors off, and that's my first Grey Cup memory. That was a really good one, too, because that had been 22 years since we'd won, and I was only 5 years old when they won that time.
Okay, so this has been a bit of a reoccurring theme in the history of our beloved Winnipeg Blue Bombers, but I suppose it just makes the victory all that much sweeter when it does happen.
Oh, it really does. I mean, if it happened every year, it'd be big deal. Like you can imagine how Calgary felt, and such good teams over the years, and other teams like the Argos have won it 24 times already, way more than anybody else. So big deal, they won it again. Whereas, the longer the drought lasts, the sweeter it is when you finally do win it. Having
said that, I don't think either of us would be opposed to maybe a couple years of just a couple years between this one and the next one, or even if they won next year. I think we'd be pretty happy.
I think we could handle that.
So you became a fan in the early 80s, late 70s, and then you were a little bit spoiled then, as you mentioned. They won a game that the 1984 Grey Cup wasn't really expected. The 1988 Grey Cup, that was not expected either.
No, that was a bit of a fluke. We lost our last 3 games in the regular season and basically limped into the playoffs. and somehow managed to find a way to defeat, I believe it was BC. And I think Matt Dunnigan was their quarterback. But basically, we won the game on defense, and the offense just basically stayed out of the defense's way and didn't make any mistakes.
And I think that was, in the last few years, the Bombers have had a competitive team. They haven't had, obviously, until this year, enough to quite get them over the hump. But I think that was almost the feeling again, was that this is going to be a team that the defense is going to have to just be a throwback to the old 80s Bomber teams where their defense was good enough to win them the game. I think what, for me, made this victory so special is that not only was it not expected, first of all, in the West semifinal, you're facing the defending champions, the Calgary Stampeders, a team that, is tough to face on any given day, especially at McMahon Stadium.
Right.
But they had just beaten the Calgary Stampeders 2 weeks ago. And you might think in one way that, hey, they've got the edge, they've got the psychological edge. But if you look at it the other way, beating the Calgary Stampeders twice in 2 weeks, not a very likely scenario.
No, and like you say, beating the Calgary Stampeders in Calgary is almost next to impossible. Prior to that game, the last 2 times we'd won in Calgary against the Stamps was when we were out of a playoff spot and the Stamps had already had their spot in the playoffs firmly cemented, so they had nothing to lose at all. So it was just a amazing story, us not only beating them, but completely dominating them as we did.
So then, of course, you fast forward to the West Final after that, facing the Saskatchewan Roughriders at Mosaic Stadium, which is never easy. They come out of that just edging out the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and I almost had a heart attack. I'm sure you and Mom were feeling the same way watching that game. Somehow they squeaked out of that one, and then when you just think that, hey, we're doing pretty good here, we are in the Grey Cup, anything can happen. You find yourself facing a Hamilton Tiger Cats team that set a franchise record for the best record that they've ever posted. And in the previous 2 games earlier this year, the last one especially, they just dismantled the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And I remember talking to you after that game, and we were both just so dejected because it wasn't as though the Bombers had opportunities to win and, didn't make good on them. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like it could have gone either way. It was just they were facing a team that was just straight up better than them.
Mm-hmm. It was completely frustrating. I mean, it was the only game we lost at home all year, and it just seemed like we didn't have any hope in scoring, which almost brought back memories of years of the really, really bad Bomber teams in 2013 and 14 and stuff, when you just went to the stadium thinking, how are we going to lose today? Because it just happened time after time after time back in those early years of Mike O'Shea, and maybe the 1 year before that, whoever coached might have been Tim Burke, the defensive coordinator the year before. But it just seemed like somehow we were going to lose. And watching that one game against Hamilton this year at home, it brought back the same memories. And I was like, my God, we just took 7 steps backwards.
Absolutely. And I mean, it had been such a promising season to that point. Obviously, Matt Nichols had already been injured. We weren't, right. I don't know if we were quite sure at that point what his status was with regards to the rest of the season. I think we were still hoping that maybe he could recover before the playoffs. Then, obviously, we find out that Matt Nichols is done for the season. And as far as we know, at that time, it's Chris Streveler or bust. And as much as we all love Chris Streveler, and even more so now, that guy's a legend in Winnipeg now.
But everybody loves Trev. I mean, to play with that much, you could see the way he was limping, and to play with that much pain and that much heart, it's almost like he just took the entire team emotionally on his back, gave it everything he had, and everybody else in the Bombers thought, geez, if this guy can do it, I mean, I got 2 healthy legs. Let's get out here and do something. And it just seemed like the whole team rallied around him.
Yeah, how do you look at that guy and the way he's playing and not step your game up? Exactly. So then, obviously following that, you're going into a championship game, winner take all, against a team that just made you look inferior, not that long ago. And the Bombers come out and put on probably the most flawless performance that I have ever seen a Winnipeg Blue Bombers team play. It was just everything was clicking, everything was working their way, and they were just not going to be denied this victory.
Absolutely. I mean, it was just incredible. I mean, I guess the old adage, you learn more from a loss than you do from a win. Seeing as they beat us twice, I guess we learned an awful lot from those losses. And maybe they just didn't quite know exactly what they're going to get from Zach Collaros, because he sure seemed to make a difference there. He had a veteran, calming presence over the team. Absolutely. On the offense. I mean, yeah, he didn't throw for a lot of yards, but we didn't make any mistakes offensively.
Yeah. So and that kind of leads me to one thought I had following the game, in that with regards to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and their team this year, the only guy that I kind of feel a bit bad for is Matt Nichols. Obviously, He's been the leader on offense of this team for the past 3-4 years, ever since he was brought in and given the shot to be their starting quarterback, and took it, has not looked back. You know, he kind of embodied the spirit of Winnipeg and this franchise, and that they're always the underdog. He's been the underdog his whole career. This coming into this season was another opportunity for redemption for him. He obviously had his season cut short. The Bombers, the team that he led, went on to achieve that redemption, but part of you almost still has to feel like Matt Nichols maybe didn't quite get that satisfaction that he was seeking.
I think that's 100% correct. I mean, if you're the quarterback, you want to be out there playing. You want to feel like the leader. I mean, yeah, you can do a lot of things in the dressing room. You can help on the sidelines an awful lot, but it's just that much more satisfying, especially for the start that he had, to be able to finish it properly. You want to be able to finish it, and unfortunately for Matt, he was unable to finish, and I agree with you. I feel really bad for him.
Yeah. So what do you do now? The Winnipeg Blue Bombers, Zach Collaros, as you mentioned, had such an incredible calming presence. He got the job done, even though he was, brought in on a like final hope, last resort type deal. And then, the thought was that it's this or bust, like the guy is probably done anyway. And the thought was that he's not going to be a guy that you're going to re-sign. He's a rental player, and that's it. But that was before he led the team to its first Grey Cup in 29 years. How do you go into this offseason in that same mindset without having this result affect it? It's almost impossible to think that way, is it not?
It is impossible, but what a great problem to have, having a guy like, choice between Matt Nichols and Zach Collaros as your starter when you've seen what both of them can do. I mean, there were years when we had no choice whatsoever as a quarterback, and all of a sudden you got a choice between one or the other, because I don't think you can re-sign them both. And which one is going to be more valuable? I mean, obviously you're going to think of the more recent memory and think, yeah, Zach Collaros is over his injury problems. He seems great. But then you think, well, for the quarterback that he was in Hamilton, before he got hurt, he looked like a world beater. But now all of a sudden you had the injuries. I mean, he did look good the last 4 weeks, didn't throw for any outstanding yardage totals, but he got the job done.
Yep.
So what a great situation to have to try to figure out which one you're going to go after. And, I mean, there's rumors about Zach Collaros wanting or maybe going back to Toronto after the season was over, which explains your rental player part perfectly. So I don't know if I were the Bombers, I would offer Collaros first and then Nichols second, but in rapid fire order. But they're going to have to do some serious soul searching about that to see which one of them has got the better chance of staying, and maybe offer that person the first contract.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, definitely, like you say, it's a nice positive spin. It is a very good problem to have, but either way, if Zach Collaros does decide that he wants to go back to Toronto, oh man, that guy he's a legend in Winnipeg forever now. He will be beloved in that city regardless of what happens from this point.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Gare, I'm going to let you go in a minute because I want you to continue going around with a goofy smile and probably not quite sure what to do with yourself. But before we go, obviously 29 years is a long drought in a league that has been largely comprised of 9 teams in that time.
Right.
You are also a longtime fan of another team that's mired in quite a drought.
Oh, that's even longer than 29 years now, isn't it?
You would have been, now correct me if my math is wrong, you would have been 12 the last time this team won a championship.
Just about to turn 12, yep.
We're, of course, talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs. You're an even longer time fan of that team than you are of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. You've said before, I've heard you say it many times, that if the Toronto Maple Leafs, you can't die until they win a championship. So you're going to live to about 126, I think was generally your estimation.
Actually, the number was 112 because that would make it exactly 100 years since the last time they won a Stanley Cup. I figure the odds have to be in their favor for that. I mean, 100 years. My odds might not be making that very good, but in making 112. But I just want to be there, and I want to have all my marbles. Well, not that I have them now, but just if they win, so I can actually understand what happened.
Yeah. Well, okay. Yeah. So I mean, we're not gonna make any predictions now because there's still a long way to go in the NHL season, obviously. But hey, if the Bombers did it, the Leafs can do it too. I think that's just the way we got to look at it. Thank you so much for joining me, Dad. Really nice talking to you about this team that you introduced me to at a very young age, before even my first memories started occurring. But it has been a journey watching this team up until this point and celebrating the first Grey Cup in 29 years for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Gare, have a wonderful night, sir.
I will, Scotty, and it was my absolute honor to be on the show with you. Thanks so much.